There are silences that say more than words ever could. You know the ones. When you're sitting across from someone and neither of you speaks, but something in that quiet moment makes you feel more understood than you've ever felt in your entire life. Maybe it's the way they look at you without judgment. Maybe it's how they don't try to fix anything or offer advice you didn't ask for. They just sit with you in the dark, and somehow that changes everything. Sometimes the deepest conversations never use sound at all. You've spent so much of your life trying to explain yourself, trying to put into words the things that live in the deepest corners of your heart, the doubts, the fears, the love that feels too big to speak aloud without breaking. You've rehearsed conversations in the shower. You've written letters you never sent. You've practiced apologies that never made it past your lips. And every time, you've come back to the same realization. There aren't enough words in any language to say what you really need someone to know, until you met someone who didn't need the words. It started so quietly you almost missed it. There was no grand moment, no movie scene where everything suddenly clicked into place. It was smaller than that, softer. It was the way they noticed when your smile didn't reach your eyes. The way they remembered that you don't like being asked if you're okay, because that question has never helped anyone who is actually struggling. It was how they learned your language without you ever teaching it to them. The language of glances and small gestures and the space between two people who understand that sometimes presence is louder than any conversation could ever be. You realized, somewhere along the way, that you'd been waiting your whole life for someone to speak your language. Not the language of words, but the language of knowing, the language of seeing someone fully and choosing to stay anyway. The language that doesn't require explanations or justifications or performances, just truth, laid bare, accepted without question. With them, you didn't have to try so hard. You didn't have to curate versions of yourself or carefully select which parts of your story were safe to share. They seemed to already know you, not because you'd told them everything, but because they'd actually paid attention. They'd watched how you moved through the world, listened to the things you said when you thought no one was paying attention, noticed the small ways you take care of the people around you while neglecting yourself entirely, and they never pointed it out. They just started taking care of you too, in their own quiet way. There's something almost miraculous about being known without having to ask for it, about being loved without having to convince someone that you're worth loving. You've spent so many years convincing people, proving yourself, explaining yourself, justifying your existence, and then they came along, and none of that was necessary anymore. But here's what nobody tells you. Being understood that deeply is terrifying. Because if someone truly knows you, then you're vulnerable in a way that feels dangerous. If they see all of you, not just the parts you've carefully constructed for public consumption, but the messy, complicated, contradictory parts, then they also have the power to leave you. And the thought of losing someone who knows you that well feels like losing a piece of yourself. So you've been afraid that if you speak the full truth of how much they matter to you, you'll somehow ruin it. Afraid that if you use actual words to describe what this means, what they mean, you'll shatter something fragile and precious. So instead, you've let your actions speak. You've shown up. You've listened. You've remembered the small details about their life that other people forget. You've tried to love them in the same quiet, unshakable way they've loved you. But there's a question growing in the silence between you now. Something that started as a whisper and is becoming harder to ignore. What if this understanding goes both ways? What if they're waiting for you to say something, and you're waiting for them to understand that you can't find the words? What if the thing you're both afraid of is not rejection, but the reality that sometimes even two hearts that understand each other perfectly need to hear it said out loud? You find yourself in moments where you almost say it. When you're alone together, and the silence feels so full of meaning that it seems impossible to say anything that would add to it. But you don't. You stay quiet. You let your eyes do the talking. Let your hands communicate what your mouth refuses to form into language. Because some people don't need to hear the words, and some people need nothing else but the words, and you're starting to wonder which one they are. There's a moment that changes everything, though you don't realize it's happening while it's occurring. You only understand it later, when you're alone and replaying the afternoon in your mind, frame by frame, searching for the exact second when the ground shifted beneath you. It happened on an ordinary day, the kind of day that feels like every other day. Nothing special marked it on a calendar. You were together, doing something simple. Maybe you were driving somewhere, or sitting in a cafe, or walking through a place you'd walked 100 times before. The details don't matter as much as what happened in the middle of it. They turned to you, and instead of looking away like they usually do, they held your gaze, not in a dramatic way, just held it, steady and present and deliberate. And in that moment you understood that they were waiting. They were waiting for you to finally say the thing that's been living in the space between you both for so long. Your heart started racing, because you knew exactly what they needed to hear. And you also knew that saying it out loud would change the dynamic of everything. It would transform this safe, unspoken understanding into something real and terrifying and permanent. Once you say it, you can't take it back. Once you name it, it exists in a way it never has before. So you didn't say anything. You looked away first, and you watched their expression shift, just barely, just enough for you to see the disappointment settle into their face like rain. They looked away too, and the moment passed. But something broke in that moment, not dramatically, not visibly, just a small fracture that you felt in your chest, a hairline crack in the foundation of something you'd been carefully building without ever acknowledging that you were building it. After that day, you started noticing things you hadn't let yourself notice before. The way they seem quieter now when you're together. The way their smiles don't quite reach their eyes anymore. The way they've stopped initiating the small touches that used to feel so natural. The hand on your shoulder, the brush of their fingers against yours. They're still there. They still show up. But something has shifted, and you're terrified that you're the reason why. You realize, with a sinking feeling, that you've been selfish. You've been so focused on protecting yourself from the vulnerability of saying how you feel that you haven't considered what your silence might be doing to them. They've been pouring themselves into this connection, showing you love in every way except the one way you actually need to hear it. And maybe they're tired. Maybe they're exhausted from loving someone who won't love them back the same way. Not because you don't feel it, but because you're too afraid to speak it into existence. You start thinking about all the moments you missed, all the times they were probably waiting for you to make a move, to take the risk first, to be brave enough to say the words that would give them permission to say theirs. And you froze. Every single time, you froze. There's a guilt that comes with this realization. A heavy, suffocating guilt that keeps you awake at night. You lie in the dark and think about how many times you could have said it, how many perfect moments you let slip through your fingers because you were afraid. The conversation in the car, where they asked you about your past, and you finally opened up, that would have been the moment. The evening on the roof, when they held your hand without saying anything, that would have been the moment. The night they fell asleep with their head on your shoulder, and you sat perfectly still because you didn't want to disturb them, didn't want anything to change. That was definitely the moment. But you wasted all of them. You wasted them all. And now you're starting to understand something darker, something that keeps you company in those quiet 3 a.m. hours when your mind won't stop spinning. Maybe your silence isn't protection at all. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a way of keeping them at arm's length without having to admit that's what you're doing. Maybe it's easier to love someone silently than to risk everything by asking them to love you openly. Because open love is fragile. Open love can be rejected. Open love can be misinterpreted or mishandled or thrown back in your face. But silent love is safe. Silent love never has to face the humiliation of not being reciprocated, because it never actually asks for anything. Except it does ask. It asks constantly. Your silence is asking them to keep guessing, keep hoping, keep waiting for you to finally be brave enough to meet them halfway. And they're getting tired of guessing. You can feel it in how they've stopped trying quite as hard, in the evenings that are a little less warm, in the way they talk about their future in ways that don't explicitly include you anymore. They're protecting themselves now, because they've realized what you're only now beginning to understand. You can't build something real with someone who refuses to speak. There's a conversation you need to have. You know this. You've known it for weeks now, maybe longer, but every time you think about actually doing it, your throat closes up. Because what if you say it, and they don't feel the same way? What if all this time, they've been kind to you out of compassion, not love? What if by finally speaking, you shatter this beautiful, unspoken thing into something ordinary and disappointing? But there's also the darker question, the one you're too afraid to ask out loud. What if you say it, and they leave anyway? What if they've already decided that they can't keep waiting? What if your moment has already passed? You're standing at a crossroads now, and you can feel it. You can feel that this silence, which once felt like protection, has become a cage. It's keeping you safe, yes, but it's also keeping you trapped, and it's slowly suffocating the thing you've been trying so hard to preserve. Something has to change. You know this. But knowing it and being brave enough to do it are two completely different things. The thing about reaching your breaking point is that it doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes you don't realize you've hit it until you're already past it, standing on the other side of a decision you didn't consciously make. That's where you are now, on the other side of fear, finally. It starts with a simple acknowledgement. You can't keep living like this. Not because it's unsustainable, though it is. Not because the silence is killing you, though it might be. But because you finally realized that your fear of losing them is actually causing you to lose them. Your protection is your poison. And the only way forward is through the thing you've been running from all along. So you reach out. You ask them to meet you somewhere quiet, somewhere you can actually talk without the world listening in. And when they agree, you notice they hesitate just slightly before saying yes. That hesitation cuts deeper than you expect it to. It confirms what you've been afraid to know. They're not sure about this anymore. They're not sure about you, but you show up anyway. When you see them, your heart does that thing it always does. It recognizes them. Not just their face, but something deeper. The way they carry themselves, the energy they bring into a room, the fact that they're here, even though you can see the uncertainty in their eyes. They're here. That has to mean something. You sit down, and the silence that follows is different from all the other silences you've shared. This one is heavier. This one is waiting. This one is a question mark that's been hanging between you for months. And finally, you're going to answer it. Your mouth is dry. Your hands are shaking a little. You've rehearsed this 1,000 times in your head, and none of those rehearsals feel adequate for this moment. None of them capture what you actually feel, but you open your mouth anyway, and the words, real, imperfect, human words, start coming out. You tell them about the moment on the ordinary day. You tell them that you felt them waiting for you to be brave, and you weren't. You tell them about all the times you could have said something and didn't. You tell them that your silence wasn't strength, it was fear. It was cowardice dressed up as protection. And then you tell them the truth, not in some grand, movie moment kind of way. Just simply, just honestly. You tell them that they matter to you in a way that terrifies you because you've never felt this vulnerable before. You tell them that you love the way they understand you without needing explanations. You tell them that you love them, actually love them. Not in some abstract, unspoken way, but in a real, specific, terrifying way. And when you say it, Something shifts in the room. You can feel it. They're quiet for a long moment. And that silence, God, that silence is the longest moment of your life. You're waiting for rejection. You're waiting for them to tell you that you waited too long, that they've already moved on, that your words don't matter anymore because you said them too late. But then they reach across the space between you and they take your hand. Their hand is warm and solid and real, and when they finally speak, their voice is softer than you've ever heard it. They tell you they've been waiting, not just for these words, but for you to finally understand that saying things out loud doesn't diminish them. It gives them shape. It makes them real in a way that silent understanding never can. They tell you they almost gave up. They tell you there were nights when they thought about walking away because they couldn't keep pouring themselves into something one-sided forever. But they didn't leave. They stayed. And now they're telling you that they stayed because they knew, on some level they knew, that you were scared, and that your silence came from a place of love, not indifference. They saw through it. They understood you even when you couldn't understand yourself. And they tell you they love you too. It's not magic. It doesn't solve everything that's broken, or make you suddenly perfect, or erase all the time you wasted in silence. But it's a beginning. It's the moment when the abstract becomes concrete, when the unspoken becomes acknowledged. When two people who have always understood each other in the quiet finally get to say it out loud and have it be real and true and permanent. In the days that follow, something changes in how you move through the world together. The silence is still there. It always will be, because some things don't need words. But now it's not a substitute for communication. It's not a shield. It's just silence, and that's enough. You understand now that some hearts do understand without saying a word. But those hearts also need to hear the words sometimes. They need to know that the love was reciprocated, that the vulnerability was worth it, that someone chose them, not just through actions, but through actual, spoken commitment. You think about all the time you spent afraid. All those moments you could have been brave but weren't. And instead of letting regret consume you, you decide to do something different. You decide to be brave now, to keep choosing them, not just in the quiet moments, but in the moments where it counts. To say the things that matter, even when they're hard to say. To speak your love into existence again and again, for as long as they're willing to listen. Because here's what you know now. Some hearts do understand without saying a word. But the best kind of love is the kind that doesn't have to choose between understanding and speaking. The kind that does both. The kind that holds you in silence and then tells you exactly what you mean, so you never have to wonder again. You were waiting for someone to understand you without needing explanation. But what you really needed was someone willing to hear you when you finally found the courage to speak. And they were always willing. They were just waiting for you to be brave enough to try.